resisting the Tories and fighting austerity. We're just going to run straight into that and probably, hopefully get finished at about 6 o'clock. Does that sound okay? So we'll just keep everybody together in the one room and just do both those sessions. Does that sound okay with everybody? Okay. All right, I'll just hand you over to Pete, who's chairing this.
Thanks, Carl. Okay, so my name is Peter Dwyer. I'm a tutor in economics at Ruskin College, and I teach on the trade union program and the social and political studies program. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this final meeting. It's a very good day. I know we're going to end on a high because I know a couple of the speakers. So I guarantee you it will be fascinating, interesting, and fun. So as Carl said, first we're going to start with Richard Boyd Barrett. Richard is a member of Parliament, the equivalent of an MP in Ireland, TD. He's been elected several times in a working class community in Ireland to Parliament, and he's part of a broad coalition of leftists, activists and parliamentarians called People for Profit. So Richard's going to talk about the left in Ireland and touch on the theme of the left in Europe. So over to you, Richard.
Thanks very much, Pete. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is there any chance you could turn the camera towards the audience so I can actually see it?
Towards the audience.
It's just a bit disappointing. Yeah, that's fair.
He likes a crowd.
Hello there, comrade from Dublin, and thanks for inviting me to speak at your event today. I suppose the feature, as we would see it, of what's happening right across Europe and indeed the world is that there is a rapidly growing disillusionment with the centre ground of politics, whether the centre right or the centre left. India of 2008 and the austerity response over the last 7 or 8 years. Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
You can hear me. And I think pretty much everywhere that growing disaffection and disillusionment with the consequences of the economic crisis and the political establishment that brought us that economic crisis and austerity have seen people looking for alternatives both to the left and to the right. And obviously you have seen with the killing of Joe Cox this week one manifestation of how disillusionment with the establishment can turn in a very nasty direction, and obviously articulated by groups like UKIP, the far right more generally across Europe, we're seeing a very, very worrying rise of the far right. Trump, again, is another expression of that in the United States. But equally, across Europe, we have also seen more progressive resistance from working class people, and that resistance finding expression in the growth of new radical left forces. Podemos, the support for Syriza, if not maybe the policies and politics that they have adopted more recently, but certainly the support for Syriza, the support for Bernie Sanders, and so on. So it seems to me there's a polarization both to the left and to the right as people grow disillusioned and angry with the political establishment and with the impact of austerity. Here in Ireland, we've seen phenomenon play, I have to say, in a particularly favourable way. In significance growth or articulation of our, but a huge collapse in the support for the centre ground of politics. pretty dramatic, increasingly grows radical left, but critically on the back of mass movements of resistance, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, against austerity. Most notably with an enormous campaign against the attempt to impose water charges and begin the process of water privatization, something that was demanded by the Troika as part of the so-called bailout after the effective collapse of the Irish economy in 2008. And what we saw over the last couple of years is some of the biggest demonstrations and the biggest popular mobilization of working class people in the history of the state, really since the revolutionary period of 1918 to 1921. Absolutely gargantuan demonstrations of a sustained mass movement and a movement of civil disobedience, a boycott against the attempt to impose an austerity charge and begin the privatization of water resources. And that, in the recent general election, led to a very dramatic shift in the political landscape. The Labour Party, who had promised when they came to power in 2011 as part of a coalition with the centre-right Fine Gael, that they would reverse the most unfair aspect IMF Troika and would begin public services and burning working class people, did an immediate, serious-style U-turn as soon as they came to office, capitulated to the Troika and continued the austerity assault on working class people, leading to wholesale cuts in jobs in the public sector, the sale of state assets, slashing of social welfare benefits, attacks on public sector pay and pensions, vicious cuts in health and education and so on. And the political cost of this betrayal, and also they're facing down of a huge popular movement of resistance against the water charges, which then erupted, has led to the effective collapse of the Labour Party in the general election that happened in the last couple of months, at the end of February, where the party went from about 36 seats in the Parliament to 6. The government's centre-right party also saw a fairly dramatic collapse in their support, and most of this disillusionment led to an increase in support for Sinn Féin, who were articulating an anti-austerity position, and in a significant growth in political support for our own alliance, the People Before Profit and Anti-Austerity Alliance, who between them won 6 seats in Parliament, doubling our representation from the previous, and we still revolutionary and radical left actually being a significant foothold in Parliament. Beyond that, also, were a radical left independence, also, and as I said, no articulation of the far right gaining ground at all. Significant. And we now have gained the majority in Parliament, have either the centre-right parties origin. They're now in a current situation with a combination of the right and left having a very significant foothold in the Parliament. Crucially, and I just want to underline this, on the back of a mass movement against the water charges. Next week, that movement is going to see its victory. And the government are going to introduce next Friday a law to suspend the water charges. And everybody knows, and it's commonly accepted, that once those water charges are suspended, never coming back. So the movement that we've seen the last 2 years is going to score a victory. And the Troika and their agenda, and those who try to promote that agenda in Irish politics, are going to suffer a humiliating defeat. That's already, if you like, an accomplished fact. In the last week, there was also an attempt to ratchet up domestic waste charges for householders by private waste companies, and within a week, because of fear that another water charge rebellion would take place on that issue, the government have also done a U-turn. And within the next few days, they are going to climb down on that as well. Other attacks that they tried to launch over the last number of weeks, I won't go through them, in areas of social welfare, where they were going to try and link social welfare entitlements for lone parents to school attendance by their children, an incredibly right-wing move. They've also backed down again in the face of immediate manifestation of popular anger echoed by the left inside the Parliament. So on issue after issue, the right are backing down and being forced into humiliating U-turns. This is really unprecedented. This radicalization has also now found manifestation north of the border, where in the elections also in the last number of weeks, the People Before Profit Alliance has made a historic breakthrough in topping the poll and winning a seat in the Northern Assembly in West Belfast, the heartland of Sinn Féin. In fact, the People Before Profit candidate elected in West Belfast got the second highest vote of any candidate in the entire election in West Belfast. Jerry Carroll being elected there, and in Derry, Eamon McCann, a legendary civil rights leader and sort of voice of the left for many decades, was also elected, giving for the first time parliamentary representation in the Northern Assembly to the radical and revolutionary left, and creating, again, a really historic and unprecedented situation where now the radical and revolutionary left have parliamentary representation both north and south of the border, which really is quite extraordinary and is having a huge impact, causing, really tremendous excitement among all sorts of people, because, if you like, the idea of a united Ireland, which has often been very abstract to people, is now gaining a more tangible expression in the growth of a united movement against austerity north and south, gaining significant representation within both parliaments on either side of the border. So these are very, very exciting developments, and the level of confidence inside the working class is really rising at a fairly exponential rate. Basically, people who've been on the defensive in the face of 25 years of neoliberalism and 7 or 8 years of very intense austerity are now sensing that they can turn the tide and actually win victories and force significant concessions from the neoliberal establishment. So this is all very positive. But what I want to say is that this still poses very important challenges and, if you like, questions for the left, particularly when you look at how we had very similar excitement with the election of Syriza in Greece, with Podemos and so on, with the growth of Bernie Sanders. And in all of these cases, particularly obviously with Syriza, all of that excitement dissipated very quickly when Syriza failed to carry through its own problem to stand up to the Troika, to burn the bondholders, and essentially capitulated to the economic and financial terrorism of the European Central Bank, and caused great disillusionment, I think, for people right across Europe who were looking to Greece as a beacon, if you like, of resistance and presenting the possibility of a serious challenge and alternative to neoliberalism. And I think critical in that failure was the, in our opinion, the naive belief that the European Union is capable of reform. And a belief that somehow if you talk reasonably to the European Union, that they would actually take on board the grievances and concerns of the people who've been the victims of the austerity assault over the last 7 or 8 years. When in fact what we saw in Greece and very much in Ireland was the opposite. That when a movement lifted into the Parliament representatives who demanded an alternative to austerity, rather than Europe saying, okay, democracy and the popular will demands a move away from austerity, what you actually got was financial and economic terrorism inflicted by the Troika on these democratically elected movements and forcing them into U-turns. We had our own manifestation of that in 2011 when the last government, who promised to burn the bondholders, got a phone call within days. This has only come out in the last 6 months or so, the details of this, got a phone call within days of it. Jean phoned up the Minister for Finance and said, if you dare to burn the bondholders, the ECB will let off a financial bomb in Dublin that would destroy the Irish economy. Actually, use that terminology, a financial bomb. And the Labour Party and the centre-right immediately capitulated. And I think the lesson for us is we have to be willing to face down the blackmail and economic terrorism of the EU and recognise the EU is not a force for some sort of social Europe or some progressive resolution to the economic crisis, but it's absolutely a vehicle and, if you like, an organisation that represents the interests of multinationals, big corporations, the banks, the military-industrial complex indeed, and is part of the problem, not part of the solution. And that if we're looking to the solution, we have to learn the lessons that we have learned very much in the last 2 years, is that the things that have produced victories, some victories now in recent months, have not been an over-obsession with gaining parliamentary majorities or even parliamentary representation, although that is helpful, but it has actually been the mass movement. And it is very clear, and it is an openly discussed point here in Ireland, literally this week, that after the victory of the water charges movement, the current climb down by the government on the issue of waste charges is that they are saying explicitly because of that so there is an explicit acknowledgement that it is the mass movement on the streets and the rebellion of working class communities, the length and breadth of the country, that actually is the driving force that is pushing back the austerity agenda and opening up new political horizons. And the very last point I want to make is that it's not only on the economic and economic front, if you like, that this resistance is having an impact. It is increasingly clear that Ireland, a country that was dominated by the Catholic Church, that continues with a prohibition on abortion, is almost certainly going to have to concede abortion rights and a woman's right to choose in the current Parliament. And in fact, we will have a bill and a motion on the Dáil agenda which will be voted for early in the autumn. And there's a general recognition that we are probably going to win that. And it is precisely, if you like, the mass movement around economic issues that has given confidence to other social movements around women's rights and indeed around things like the anti-racist movement, the LGBT movement, where we won a popular referendum recently to allow gay marriage. This is in Catholic Ireland, a country that really was the sort of Catholic equivalent of the Taliban regime, in Afghanistan has been absolutely rocked to its foundations and driven back as the mass movement against austerity has given confidence to social movements on a whole range of other issues to push forward for progressive social change. And that really is, I suppose, the discussion we are having now, that as we build on the historic breakthrough that the radical left is making, we need to be absolutely clear that it is the focus on mass mobilization from below, whether it's on the economic or social issues, that is the driving force in this country and across Europe in actually challenging the austerity agenda and the right, and indeed creating an alternative focus for the disillusionment with the establishment that if it doesn't move to the left, as we can see in other parts of Europe, can be expressed in the growth of the far right. So I think that is both the opportunity, but also the challenge for the radical left in the current period. So I'll leave it at that.
We're just going to ask for some questions, okay?
Sure.
So any questions for Richard?
Couldn't really follow that. Couldn't really follow that statement. Brilliant.
Anyone have any clarifications or any other questions for Richard? Anything at all?
It's good to hear from them, you know what the other side's doing.
Sure.
They seem to be doing a lot better than what we are.
Yeah, they are. They're learning the lessons, yeah.
Obviously, Southern Ireland has had a lot of austerity put on them from the European Union. Do you think that you will have a referendum on coming out of Europe, or do you think that the way that the left is mobilising in Ireland, that you will be able to make change from within the European Union?
Did you get that, Richard?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, well, I think at the moment the question of being in or out of Europe is not seen as central to driving the anti-austerity agenda, or if you like, the left agenda at the moment. Although with the Brexit debate, that is beginning to change. And I think if there is an exit, or even the debate as we come towards the vote is beginning to escalate in Ireland. But if Britain votes to leave, I think that will open up the debate in an even more significant way over here. Certainly it should do, because, I mean, if you take a couple of the issues that are absolutely central, sort of immediate issues facing people in the country, in Ireland at the moment, they are enormous and unprecedented housing and homelessness crisis. There's also an enormous crisis in the public health service, and both of these things arise out of the EU-IMF imposed austerity, but also the EU fiscal treaty, the rules of the EU fiscal pact are also the key reason why we can't solve those problems. Because under the EU fiscal pact, Ireland was allowed to borrow 64 billion euro to pay to bail out the private banking system, but we are not allowed to borrow 1 cent to build social housing, because it would breach the rules of the fiscal treaty. We're not allowed to borrow 1 cent to invest in the health infrastructure. So Europe's rules are, you can borrow money to bail out private banks, but you can't borrow money to build social housing for the homeless, the number of whom is proliferating on an astronomical level. So this debate needs to be had, but at the moment it's more around the concrete issues that people are mobilising. But I think the issue of Europe is increasingly, and Europe's role in creating the austerity mess is beginning to move more centre stage. It did also, it has to be said, during the Greek crisis. I think at that point, when we had some of the big water demonstrations during the height of the Greek crisis referendum, what was absolutely astonishing is we had 250,000 people on the streets, and from the poorest working class neighbourhood in Greece, and they were all carrying Greek flags in Dublin. It was absolutely extraordinary. So there is a strong consciousness of the European and international dimension of this situation, but at this particular moment, it's tending to concentrate around specific struggles that people are fighting. But I think it's a very fluid situation.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Richard?
Can I ask one other thing?
Yeah, no one else has got one yet? Sure.
Richard, do you know what they call the Irish Tiger? When you have hundreds of empty houses because lots of obviously private estates and that were built, and then when the tiger fell within the with the financial crisis, is there not any move to take those houses and so they can be transferred over to the public sector, so that they can that could broach the homeless problem?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And indeed, we've been saying this for 5 years. And in fact, now because we have a stronger position in Parliament, we this week submitted a bill which will be debated and voted upon in Parliament, arguing for precisely that. And again, as a sign of, if you like, the government's weakness and our growing strength, and more importantly, the strength of, if you like, the popular movement, it looks as if the government are going to be forced to move somewhat in that direction. Although that battle is not fully resolved, but certainly they are backtracking on what was an absolutely scandalous situation where the wholesale privatisation of the housing market during the Celtic Tiger period crashed the entire economy, and it led to this appalling contradiction where we were building more houses than we had ever done in the history of the state, and at the same time we had the biggest housing and homelessness crisis in the history of the state. So this is an unbelievable contradiction and shows the utter bankruptcy of the market. That, you know, supply does not equal demand. You know, to use the neoliberal classic economic theory, the opposite. Even when demand is massively high and supply is massively high, the market is incapable of putting the two things together because profit is the determining factor. So now there is, I would say, a majority sentiment in the country that we need to nationalise a significant portion, at least, of the housing sector and a return to the direct provision of council housing. And the neoliberal parties are really defenceless in the face now of that argument. So we have the wind in our sails in beginning to reverse some of the neoliberal claptrap that has led us into this crisis in the first place. So yeah, that is one of the absolute key issues and majorly debated issues that is now happening in the country.
Good luck to that, and carry on with your fight, because the way you're mobilising, you've got to keep it going, and there's every possibility that you could change it from within, and it'd be better to do that than isolate yourself from Europe. Well done.
I always wanted to shut it up. Okay, thanks for that. So next is Kevin Ovenden. I came across Kevin's work about 20 odd years ago when he wrote a brilliant book on Malcolm X. So if you're interested in Malcolm X, Kevin, you can get hold of Kevin's book. It's a classic. Kevin's also written a book that is now the go-to book about Syriza, which is the theme of his talk. It's called Syriza Inside the Labyrinth. He's been spending time in Greece the last couple of years. He's a long-time activist in Britain, and he really is going to talk to us about what's been going on over there.
So I speak from here. Is that okay?
Wherever you come
Yeah, great. I want to just take us back to 4 weeks ago, to a number of events which happened on the weekend of the 22nd of May, which illustrate the thing which Richard started with about the political polarisation just taking place across Europe, the crisis and the growth of forces to the left and the forces to the right. A man called Norbert Hofer came within 30,000 votes of being elected to be the president of Austria. not on the Sunday the 22nd of May. Norbert Hofer is a fascist. He was the candidate of a party called the Freedom Party, which was founded by Nazis in Austria after the Second World War. It's a far-right party, but with a fascist core. The other thing that happened was in France. The struggle, which people will have seen on the TV, of against the labour law, against the neoliberal reforms, the massive austerity attack in France, looked like it was running down. The police were using the laws passed by the Hollande government, which is there was a state of emergency in France. Right? Democratic norms in France have been suspended for 8 or 9 months. Not in somewhere in Eastern Europe, in France, at the core of the European continent, at the core of the European Union. Tear gas and baton charges were being used and people were being driven off the streets. The CGT Union and its militants, particularly in the haulage and refining industries, hit upon a tactic, which is that the police can beat you off the streets, but if you pull the workers out of the oil refineries, you can grind France to a halt. And they took that decision that weekend, and the struggle has been picking up since, and we're now engaged in an enormous battle, the biggest class confrontation in France for decades, which will, in some way, its outcome will have a major bearing on the future of all of our lives. The third thing that happened is that the first opinion polls came out for the election which is due to take place in 8 days' time in Spain, in the Spanish state, a rerun of the election at the end of last year. These opinion polls, and it's been confirmed since, showed that the equivalent of the Tory party is on about 29 or 30%. The second party is Podemos, in alliance with a party called the United Left, Unidos, which together form the force of the radical left. They're on 24-25% of the vote. So, a fascist nearly wins. A confrontation in France which has scenes which have not been seen since 1968. And the radical left in Spain, which was under the dictatorship of Franco for 60 years, emerges and will almost certainly be the second party in Spain. How can all of these things be happening at the same time? This is what I want to try to address, and what does it mean for the left and the opportunities for the left. And these processes are concentrated in the country of Greece, which is where I live. Last year I lived there for almost all of the time, almost all the time in Athens. Also on that weekend, on the 22nd of May, the Syriza government passed the third memorandum, the third austerity memorandum. I won't go through all the details, we can go through the figures speak for themselves, but one thing which people should know, we have cholera in parts of Greece. We have cholera in some of the refugee camps. A disease which can spread very rapidly in conditions of poverty. This is Europe of 2016. It's not the shiny Europe of the Brussels Parliament. It's where I live, where my neighbours live, where people are begging for bread in the streets. One of the measures is what's called the koftis, which is the best translation is guillotine. What it means is, if Greece fails to meet the targets which have been set by the IMF, the European Central Bank and the European Union, although the IMF would like to be lighter, it's the European Union which is pushing harder, then there will be a further round of austerity measures with no vote by anybody in Greece at all. It won't go to the Parliament. The privatisation body has now run by people from Germany and France. There is a degree of financial colonisation and the truncation of parliamentary democracy in Greece, which has not been seen since the fall of the dictatorships of 1974, 5 and 6 in Greece, Portugal and in Spain. In these conditions, we also have the EU-Turkey deal of shame, which has stranded 57,000 refugees in Greece. Now, if you read any of the main papers, the prediction of what will happen in these circumstances is this: that if you have austerity and refugees, you will have racism. That's it. That's the only thing that will happen. We have 27% unemployment in Greece and 55% youth unemployment. There was a survey 5 weeks ago which found that 85% of people in Greece say, I quote, "Greece must help the refugees." This is not down. It's not down to the fact that Greeks are particularly generous people and so on. We have a right wing and we have fascism. It's down to what I want to return to at the end. The role of the left in bringing together the anti-racist struggle and the anti-austerity movement, even despite the capitulation of the Syriza government last year, has meant that we have a country which has the highest unemployment in Europe and also the highest level of support for the refugees, and people are fighting to defend the refugees, physically fighting against the riot police. It's incredibly inspiring and moving to live in a country like that. And the left can make a difference in these situations. Very, very important, I think, for us to understand. And I just want to look at the nature of the European crisis along 3 dimensions, and then return to Greece. The first is austerity. The second is fortress Europe and racism and all that goes with that. And the third is the overarching political crisis. Crisis of austerity. The IMF itself has said that austerity isn't working. But when you say austerity isn't working, not working for who? It's not working in that it's not doing what it said it would do, which is restore the economies to growth and so on. We have, insofar as there is growth, pathetic growth, and everybody anticipates a new recession. But austerity was never really about that. A man called John Nelios, who until March of last year was the chief economic advisor for the Syriza party of government, wrote a very good article. It's short, so people can look it up, called The Class Logic of Austerity. He said what austerity was about was the organisation of capitalist interests across Europe against working class people to make working class people pay for the crisis and to turbocharge again the whole neoliberal rebalancing of society so everything serves the corporations. And in that sense, austerity has not failed for the bosses. It's failed in terms of what it said it would do for society. It's socially failed. It's not failed for the boss class, and that's why the boss class are sticking with austerity. But what it's led to, of course, is immense social polarisation, not just Greece. The population of Latvia is 1/6 down. It's fallen by 1/6. The number of teachers in Latvia has fallen by 30%. How do kids get educated in Latvia? At the beginning of this century, 2000, Italy had the second highest proportion of its economy devoted to manufacturing, next to Germany's. Now, Italy has lost 15% of manufacturing capacity. The Italian economy is the same size now as it was in 2000. No growth in it's not just Greece. We've got through Ireland, Richard spoke about. In this context, we have the Fortress Europe policy. I just want to say, by way of introduction to that, every year in Germany, 100,000 more people die than are born. Germany needs immigration. In Britain, the expectations are that the northwest region, the area that I'm from, Hull and the East Riding and so on, that the number of people of working age is due to decline by 3 or 4 or 5% over the course of the next 10 years, through internal migration. We need people to come. We need people to come if we're to do what was done after the Second World War, where Germany went and brought workers wholesale, not with rights actually, not with guest workers, from Turkey to come and work, to say we'll recover from the devastation of the 1940s and before that the 30s through a programme of expansion of education, expansion of housing, expansion of the economy as a whole, but we're connected to austerity, which is not about long-term investment. There's money floating around which the bosses aren't investing. So if you have austerity, although you need people to have growth, you keep people out. Austerity capitalism kills growth. So austerity governments kill refugees in the Mediterranean. That's what the whole logic of the situation is. And it predates the immediate refugee crisis. Since 1985, internal borders have gone down. They're now beginning to reappear, right, in Europe. But they've gone down in what was called the Schengen process. As those borders went down, higher and higher went the barbed wire around the continent. People, black and brown bodies, were being washed up on the beaches of Lampedusa and of Tenerife and of the River Evros in Greece 5, 10, 15 years ago, not just recently, it's accelerated recently, because they had a policy which was that all ships, all naval vessels should come to the rescue of those in distress in the Mediterranean. It was called Mare Nostrum, and the European Union abandoned it because an acceptable number of deaths for them would deter people from coming into the continent. That is what is happening. And if you do that, you generate racism inside of the continent. Secondly, national antagonisms arising. It's not true that Europe abolished national antagonisms. The reconstruction of Europe, and latterly the EEC and the EU, was about reconstructing the nation states of Europe, which were in tatters after the Second World War. It's a very good book, if people want to look this up, by a man called Alan Millward, called The European Rescue of the Nation State, which shows that the reorganisation of European capitalism Europe-wide was also about the reorganisation of states and their armed forces and the political structures of capitalism, West Germany, now Germany as a whole, Britain, France, and so on. Thirdly, there's another source of the racism out of which forces of the far right can grow, which is Islamophobia. The Islamophobia, again, predates the crisis, 2008. Predates, but was massively accelerated by the so-called war on terror from 2001 onwards, for obvious reasons. You know, if you bomb people in Afghanistan, and people in Afghanistan fight back, well, you either accept that people in Afghanistan are like you and me, and if people bombed us, would fight back, or you have to have an explanation as to why they're irrational and hate Western civilization and so on. So the Islamophobia goes with the wars. The Islamophobia plays a particular role, because the Islamophobic racism, which ties with the anti-refugee racism, because the refugees are mainly from Muslim-majority countries, identifies the Muslim not just as a competitor for jobs within. It's not just that simple thing which you can sometimes come across. The Muslim is an enemy within and an enemy without, an enemy in the whole of the Middle East, an enemy in Afghanistan, threatening to tear down Western civilization, corrupting it within and threatening to tear down civilization from without. That's how anti-Semitism worked at the beginning of the last century. And these are the general conditions which are coming from the centre of European politics, the centre of European politics. Nicolas Sarkozy, who might make a bid to become President of France again next April, May, just did an interview in El País, in the Spanish paper, in which his programme is internment camps in North Africa by regimes such as General Sisi's in Egypt to stop people coming to Europe, re-education camps for Islamists, by which he means anybody who has any kind of political politics are at all informed by Islam, which could be Salman Yaqub in Britain, we're not talking jihadis, and bringing the unions to heel, right? Marine Le Pen is a fascist, but her programme is not that much different from what Sarkozy is saying. So the enemy is not just the most ugly enemy in the face of people like Le Pen, or people who are not fascist but racist populists like UKIP here. Now, thirdly, all this is happening in the context of a political crisis. And the political crisis is deep-seated. For 30 years now, we've had supposedly the good years of neoliberalism and then the crisis years. We've had a declining weight of the parties of the political centre inside of society. Put it like this, it was common until 30 years ago for where there's a two-party system, which is in most of Europe. Greece had essentially a two-party system. Germany, Spain, Britain, and so on. For the parties, the equivalents to Labour and the Tories, together to get 75, 80 or more percent of the vote. Now it's common for them to get 50%. The equivalent of the Labour Party in Greece, PASOK, which was in government for most of the time since 1974, now has 4% of the opinion polls, and is 160 million euros in debt. And it may disappear as a marvel. In the Spanish election, the centre-right and the centre-left together will struggle to get over 50% of the votes. And it's not just that. If you look everywhere, the deep distrust of politicians, of political institutions, and so on, where people are quite right to be disgusted. I mean, people remember the expenses scandal. Why should people, ordinary people, have a faith in an institution which does that, and then is populated by people who are named in the Panama Papers? It's not some irrational, feeling amongst people. There are rational reasons why people are rejecting the parties of the centre. And it's in that context that you can have forces to the right and to the left emerging. And I just want to end on that point, because it's not an automatic process. You see, there's really no reason in sociological terms why in Greece the capitulation of the Syriza government should not have led to the growth of the fascists. I say that because the fascist party, which is a real fascist party, it has stormtroopers, it murdered Shehzad Plan, it murdered the anti-racist rapper Pavlos Fisas, it's attacked socialists and others, it nearly murdered the communist trade unionists of Palmer and the Egyptian fishermen who my boyfriend represents in the court case against Golden Dawn. Was on 7% of the vote and did make an effort through street violence to control areas. It's because there was a movement which confronted that, which erupted particularly in 2013 after the murder of Pavlos Fisas, that the growth of the fascists was checked. And that's meant that in the crisis following the Syriza's capitulation, people haven't automatically moved over to more radical parties than Syriza, but the national conversation is happening on the left. It's not happening on the right. Racism as an idea in society, for it really to tip over and swing us over to the barbarity of fascism, has to be organised by a political force which can do it. It's not just a set of ideas. There's no automaticity about it. Just because the stock market goes down doesn't mean that the level of racist murders goes up. An idea doesn't kill. A party of thugs has to organise and get knives, military training, go on the internet 15 years ago and make a gun and kill a Labour MP in London. And it's the struggle of the left inserting itself in that which has made a huge difference. The final thing is that the left is offering a political alternative on the basis of what in Greece and what Richard was saying. And here, have I got 2 minutes to look at what happened with Syriza. The strategic problem that Syriza faced was this. It's believed, when it won the election in January of last year, 2015, its strategy was that a combination of the electoral support and the rational argument that it would put to the European Union to lift the austerity off of Greece would be enough to change the EU, the sisters just out of the room, but to change the EU from within. And they thought, because the IMF is saying that even the policies are too far for Greece, and there's even some divisions in the EU, that we'll find a side in the EU, that we have a social democratic government in France and in Italy and so on. What happened? What happened tells us something very much about the EU and the European Central Bank. These are not, the EU is not like a room like this, where heads of government come and talk. It's not an empty field. It's packed with institutions which defend the interests of capitalism for each of the nation states, organised in a hierarchy which has Germany at the top. So it principally defends the richer states and will squeeze the other ones, but it defends capitalism as a whole. What happened when the Greek bosses lost the election? They didn't have a political force in Greek society. The centre-right was falling apart. The European Union went into battle into Greece for the interests of the Greek capitalist class, for the interests of Greek bosses. And the European Union is going into battle in France now, alongside the government and alongside Alain Juppé and Sarkozy. The European Union, 2 weeks ago, said whoever is elected in Spain will have to implement 8 billion euros of extra cuts. If you're a boss in Spain, elections are not as nerve-wracking as they are if you're a worker. If you're a worker, if your party loses, the right get in, it's really bad. If you're a boss, your party loses, and the left get in, you go to the European Union, who are completely immune to the democratic outcome. That's the way that the process worked, and they ran up against it. We ran up against it in Greek society. Under those circumstances, to advance the struggle any further meant that at the heart of the Syriza government had to be, well, if we can't do this in the confines of the European structures, we have to go beyond the confines. And what does that mean?